All right, so we're going to be starting this week on grading, and we're going to be going over this over the next few weeks. And even though you got your homework for the site plan, which is going to be something we're going to have to add our grading plan to as far as the homework later on, you just got that. I want to start on this because this is one of the things that you're going to need to know how to do, especially if you're doing general engineering and things like that. If it's like, well, I plan to be a structural engineer. Well, sometimes plans change, so I want to be able to teach this now so you have some background on it. Number two, we actually have a class, 449, that covers more of the structural side of this thing, and we do some building design and stuff like that, and do some structural things, use some of the structural tools. But it helps to have some of those structural classes ahead of time. And so this we can do without needing that background. And so we're going to start with grading. We're going to do grading. We're going to cover this over a series of videos. We'll have a homework assignment on it, things like that. And then we'll kind of go from there. Okay? So let's kind of get started. Let me show you what we're going to be doing today. So this is what our plan is. We're going to create a base grading, so it's going to look like this. We've got our, this is the overall area that we're talking about. Right here is a little pond we're going to develop, and we're going to just do it by building up the sides and all this, a detention or retention pond, depending on how you want to design it. So that's going to go right here. And then this over here on this side, this is more of a cattle pond style thing. You see all over in Texas, you just push up the edge and let the water get trapped behind it. And so then they have water tanks for their cattle and all that. So that's kind of our goal. So by the end of the class, you should be able to first create a feature line. It's not really hard to do. We're going to make a polyline, convert to a feature line. But I want to explain some of that beforehand and let you know how to do that and all that. The other thing I want to do is edit the elevation points and show you how to do that so you're comfortable at changing that. That's going to be important whenever you're doing grading, is knowing the elevation and knowing what you want to do with that number. The third thing we're going to do is create a feature line from the alignment, and then we'll create a grading from the alignment. And so by the end of the class, you should be able to do all these things on your own. All right? So before we do, let's go over a little bit of terminology. I'll use these terms, and I want you to kind of understand the difference between them. When I'm talking grading, that's what we're doing to the ground. So we're going to create a slope by, moving earth, basically. Now, with that in mind, grade is normally how we express a slope, especially if it's kind of a more gradual slope. So like if you'll see something like this, which is a negative 1.27% slope, what that means is over 100 feet, the ground is falling away. It's going down 1.27 feet. So a much more gradual slope. Roads normally have a grade from the crown to the gutter of about 3% or 2.5%, enough to move the water, but it's a pretty gentle grade and things like that. If you're going uphill, then it will be a positive grade. If you're going downhill, it'll be a negative grade. Slope, on the other hand, excuse me, is shown as a ratio. So like a 4-to-1 slope means I'll go out 4 feet, drop 1. A 2-to-1 slope means I go out 2 feet, drop 1. A 1-to-1 would be basically a 45-degree angle. So we're talking a much steeper slope whenever we say we're adding a slope to something. You can use either one. So if I have really high percentage grade, that would equal things like the slope. And so that kind of explains how we do our stuff. So let's talk about grading in general. First thing is you have to have a plan. So to do that, one of the things you got to understand is people have been grading out the land for years. using dirt and everything else to move water where they want it to move, move water away from where they want it to move away, hold it, things like that. So this has been done thousands of years. So first off, know that it can be done. The other thing is, what's going to be important to us as an engineer is going to be that final surface. So the reason why I want to stress that is if you're using Civil 3D or any of these other tools, sometimes there's something you want to use and you go to the grading tools and you're trying and you can't quite find what you want. Well, what you have to understand is don't necessarily worry about the grading tools, worry about what the final result's going to be. And so sometimes you can kind of fudge the things by doing things like just surface commands, using break lines, things like that to help you in your design. We're going to use a lot of grading tools. They're going to be great. They're going to help us with everything. But don't get stuck in that idea. The key for us is a surface, because a lot of times once we get that surface, we'll be able to pull out GPS data off of that we can actually directly tie in to earth moving equipment. It'll set the blade of the bulldozer or whatever a certain height and it will start grading out. But we need that surface first. And so that's also going to help us when we're doing our surveying and stuff like that for our final ground surface. So that's the key. And then the other thing is keep it simple. Step it out. If you haven't figured out, by the time you're a senior, you should. Engineers are not lazy, we're efficient. And one of the things that we try to do, though, is keep everything simple. Simplify out the equation, make it easy for us to figure out. And then, if we need to, and we don't feel comfortable with how we simplified it, we use things like safety factors and stuff like that to take care of it. And so keep that in mind whenever you're doing the thing. So just take it one task at a time, you should be fine. So as far as having a plan, a lot of times I'll come in, just like we had the surface assignment, I'll pull that in for an area and I'll just print it with the contour lines. I haven't done anything else yet, just printed it out, and I'll break out that paper and then I'll start kind of planning what I want to do for my thing. And so a plan helps you organize your design, allows you to keep your design steps simple and things like that. Now this doesn't look overly simple, but I'll try to explain it on the next slide. So this is what we have. This is actually, it's right on the border between Nevada and California. I had a guy in a class that I was sitting in on basically do this design. This is what he did. It was a project. What was really cool is I accidentally ended up finding this because I was driving old Route 66 and ended up driving right past this thing. So you go across the Mojave Desert, you kind of hit the mountains on the other side, you go up and over, and that's where this is. And so what this is a retention pond that they're trying to hold waste water and things like that in, and then they'll pump it out and clean it up and stuff like that. And so the goal of this pond is to actually hold the water. They want to hold it. But because it's a waste cell, there's a lot of stuff in there that they don't want to get out into the water supply and everything like that. And so if you've ever been out towards the desert, things like that, it doesn't rain until it rains. In other words, it's for the most part a pretty everyday sort of thing, nothing much happening, and then all of a sudden you get this deluge and everything goes downhill from there. And so what they're trying to do here is two things. One, hold the water that they want held. And number two, get the water away from that they don't want to hold. In other words, the rainwater, they don't want the rainwater to go into this pond, overfill the pond, and allow that wastewater to dump out. And so what you're looking at here is your pond, which is going to be right in the middle. So this area right here, which is the pond. And then if you look up here, what this is going around is a little ditch or canal that's directing rainwater coming off these slopes. And if you look, really tight contours. So it's pretty steep slopes here we flatten out, and then we have steep slopes going downhill here. The water is going to come down, it's going to hit, and he wants it to run off this direction and get out of the way. This direction, and he has a little storage pond here for it for a little bit. And then he has a way for that water to go away. And so what you're looking at here is, here's his pond, here's his ditches, and what he's done is he's done cross sections. So if you look at this BB, that's cutting across it, and so that would be right here. And so here you can see the slope, that's the little dashed line. And then so it comes in, here's where he's building his little pond. Comes in, he has a ditch, that's what this is. Then there's a little lip to keep the water from coming up and over. And then this water's going to run down. And then over here, this is where he's dug out his pond, and this is storing the waste cell. If we look over here, here's CC, so this is on the downhill slope. And you'll notice here, so if you look at this section, here's the pond now on the left, because we're looking this way, so the pond's on the left. Here's the lip of the pond, and then it drops down. Well, you'll notice there's no slope here, because he's not worried about that. If water hits here, it just runs down the hill. It's not going to affect his pond any. So he doesn't have to worry about a way to direct it away from his waste cell. And then if you come over here and look at section AA, well, in this case, he has a little bit of a smaller little ditch, kind of catching the water, running it off. On this side, he's not worried about the water goes away. And of course, here's the waste cell. And so this is what he's planning, which doesn't look that hard. And then over here, he's kind of written out what he wants. So if you look over here, he has something that is a 1.5 to 1 slope. So it goes out 1.5 feet for every foot it goes up. So that's that slope right here. Same thing over here. He has a nice 6 foot wide ditch. And so that's his plan. Here's the top of the lip for his pond. And he wanted that wide because if you look, there's a sump right here. And so what he's going to do is back a truck up there, hook up a sump pump to it, suck out the water, drive it off. So he wants it wide. So that's why it's 12 feet. But you'll notice he has a little 2% slope. So water hits, if it hits the top of his pond, if he hits the top of the mound, the dirt mound, it's going to hit and it's going to roll off and into the ditch instead of rolling off and into his pond. So he's even getting that away from his waste cell. And then he has a little bit of a slope of 2 to 1 over here as far as going into the waste cell. So that's his design. And it looks complicated. And I looked at it when he first showed me in the class and I was like, oh crap, this is going to be hard. And then of course he completely made it easy and got it done in about 30 minutes. So even this, which is a pretty complicated design, because he simplified it out, because he sketched it out, he had a plan, and then he just kind of did it one thing at a time. So get a plan first, and then kind of go from there. So how are we going to do this? Well, whenever you're doing gradings and whenever you're doing surfaces, one of the things that you can use for your surface whenever you're creating your own is going to be feature lines. And we actually had an example of using feature lines when I was talking about surfaces. We used them as break lines, and that is what we were able to create that one shape with and all in the examples. That was prior to spring break, so, you know, pre-corona. And so we had that video on that, and we used feature lines. Well, feature lines are polylines on steroids, or I guess I said polylines were lines on steroids. So let me say feature lines are polylines on growth hormones. Does that help? They can be drawn directly. So I can actually draw out a feature line, which is okay. I tend to like to kind of flush mine out with polylines first. And then I come over and I'm going to convert them to feature lines. They'll store horizontal and elevation data, so X, Y, and Z, just like a regular line, but they do things slightly different. So like if I wanted to create a spiral, I can't actually do that with a polyline. it doesn't work. It can't drop an elevation and do a curve correctly. You can, however, create spirals with feature lines. And so a lot of times if you think like a clover leaf at an intersection, so you go over the overpass and then you have this kind of clover leaf line that curves back down and underneath the overpass, that would have to be done with a feature line, not a polyline. And so they have the ability to do that. We use them for our grading and all that. We don't have to put in as much data at certain points to get it to do what we want to do, and so that helps. It optimizes the data, and it's real easy to do certain things just like we do with polylines, except we kind of have our unique commands for it. So when we offset a feature line, we won't use the offset command. We'll use the feature line offset command, and I'll show you where those are a little bit later. But whenever you create it, you'll just come in. Feature lines need to be associated with the site. So write that down. Put a star by it. I'm going to ask a question about it. Feature lines need to be in a site. So when you are doing a grading, you need to be doing a grading in that same site for you to see the feature line. So they only reside, if you remember, we talked about sites. Those are a folder that we're putting in our little file cabinet. The feature lines are in there. They only deal with what's in the site that they're dealing with. And so we need to put them in a site. We can give them a name. Otherwise, they're just feature line 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is fine. But if you're if there's one you think you need to find later, give it a name. They have a couple different styles. I'll just show those off in a little bit. And then you come down here and it says, okay, what do you want to do with these? And so a lot of times, this defaults to being checked where it says erase existing entities. But in reality, you don't need to do that. Sometimes I know a lot of guys that will uncheck this box. They'll make sure they have their polylines in their original design in a certain layer that they can control by turning on and off. But they don't want to lose it when they're using those lines for feature lines. And so they'll uncheck this box. And it's going to be kind of up to you to develop out your workflow and whether you want to use those again. I tend to like to use them again. So I tend to uncheck that box. But what we're going to be doing today is not really going to be making a big difference. The next thing is, when you create it, it normally defaults to being created on whatever elevation you sketched your polylines on, which is normally 0. We're going to be dealing with higher elevations. So a lot of times you want to assign the elevation. And so if you check that box, you can assign the elevation. Once you hit OK, I'll talk about weed points later. Don't worry about that. Once you hit OK, it's going to come up and say, okay, do you want them all on the same elevation? So you have the ability to do that. You can actually take your shape and like paste it on a surface. So it just goes straight up, and as soon as it hits the surface, that's where it sets the elevation of whatever point. And so you can paste it onto the surface, almost like draping a sheet over the surface. You can do that and all that. In this case, they just set an elevation, they hit OK, and it came in. So we're going to use this. We're going to come in, we're going to go feature line, create feature line from object, and we'll create a feature line. Now, one of the things I want to point out with this, though, is it also has a kind of cool thing that you can do with this. So let's say you have a line, and this from point 1 to point 2, and so you want, that's important. But you want the elevation to change along that line. What you can do is you can put in what's called an elevation point. An elevation point does not, its X and Y is controlled by other points. In other words, it basically sits on a line, and it's like in between the line, the 2 points that make up the line. And it will change elevation, but it's tied to that line. When the line moves, it moves. So that's kind of cool. You can use that. Otherwise, your points that you create, especially like endpoints and things like that, are what's called PIs, which are a standard point. It has like an X, a Y, and a Z, or a northing, easting, and elevation, like that. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in. I'm going to do a video just kind of converting this to a feature line. There's not going to be a lot of stuff going on. I have these two things. I'll kind of show you where we're developing out this site. It's the one we've messed around with before, so you'll recognize it. It has a surface already added, and then I turned off the surface, so I set the display style to none so it doesn't show up, but it's there. And I have these two shapes. This one is the pond that we're going to create. This other one is going to be like the little water tank for cattle, and we'll create that one as well. And so we're going to bring both of those in. So let me go ahead and do that. Here's the steps that we're going to do. I'm going to break out. So I'm going to open up example 10.1. I'm going to select the feature line from the home toolbar. I'm going to go create the feature lines and then set an elevation and hit OK and be done. Okay, so that's the game plan. All right, so let's go over to Civil 3D.